In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the camshaft position sensors on this Ford F-350 with a 6.2 liter V8 engine. For this, we actually have to remove the intake manifold because they sit at the back of the engine under the intake manifold. So I recommend having intake manifold gaskets on hand to replace them. Most of the time, you do need new ones. Let's get started. Let's remove the two 8mm clamps holding both ends of this intake snorkel on so that we can make more space. So remove the coolant overflow tank hose that runs across it. Set that aside. With that out of the way, we have two hoses to remove here. One is this one, and one is the breather that comes off of the PCV. This one up front has a hose clamp. Mine looks like it's in very poor condition, so hopefully I can actually get it off of here. Sometimes that happens. We'll have to replace it. Take this hose off. Set that aside. For this line right here, there's going to be, if you see this gray tab, there's going to be a clip on it on the back side that you have to pry on. And once you twist that, that should release the whole line. And then you can push it out of the way. On the other side, we just have a few retainers holding on some of these hoses. Oh, looks like this one's already broken. It's supposed to be there. We'll pop this one out. Okay, there we go. Nothing else is attached over here. Use a 10mm socket and remove the two bolts holding this intake piece on. With these bolts off, you should be able to lift this right up and off. Over here, let's unplug the throttle body. There's a red locking tab that prevents this from just getting unplugged. So pry out on that and then press on the tab, disconnect the connector. Now this piece right here we have to remove so that we can get better access to the throttle body bolts. Now you can leave the throttle body attached to the intake, but it makes things easier if you just remove it and make more space for yourself. This does come off of the other piece of the intake, and doing it this way actually makes it a lot easier to get to this clamp. So use an 8mm socket and loosen up that clamp. With that loosened up, you should be able to wiggle this off. There we go. And now with a 10mm socket, remove the 4 bolts holding this throttle body onto the intake. Set that aside. On this side there's a retainer we have to pop out. We have to free up the wiring harness from everywhere. This hose that runs across, I'm just going to disconnect from over here and set it out of my way. Let's unplug this connector, set that wiring aside, and since we're here, let's unbolt this solenoid. I'm not going to unplug the line that's on the back of it, I'm just going to push it away. Another retainer for a wire down here. Let's remove this hose that's on the back. Pinch that clamp, push it aside, and pry the hose off. There we go. All the way in the back, we have these retainers that hold on this wiring harness. Those are going to be kind of tricky to take off. There's one on each side, but they have to come off because the harness is attached to the intake there. So do whatever you have to do and try to sneak in there with a trim tool to remove them and pop them out. There we go. We'll do the same on the other side. We have another one of these connections over here. Pop this out, and this gives us better access to that retainer. There we go. Now let's unplug the ignition coils, spark plug wires. Using an 8mm socket, unbolt the ignition coils. The connectors on the ignition coils will have red locking tabs on them that have to be pried out in order to get unlocked. Now before going further, I'm going to use a vacuum and vacuum everywhere where I just pulled the ignition coils out, because in my case it's packed with dirt, debris, and I want it all out of there. Then we can continue. Next, we have to disconnect the battery because the alternator needs to come out of our way, and we need to isolate power in order to do that. On the rear side of the battery, closest to the firewall, you'll find your negative battery terminal. Use an 8mm socket or wrench and loosen the mounting nut that holds this terminal down. Once it's loose enough, you should be able to wiggle it, pull it right off the battery. Set that aside. And now with the battery disconnected, I'm going to remove the retainers for this wiring harness. I'm going to use a trim tool and pop out this retainer for this alternator harness. Unplug this connector by pressing on the locking tab on the back side. Sometimes you might need a little pocket screwdriver to help you press on it while you pull. There we go. And then we'll peel this boot right up and off. Use a 13mm socket. Remove this mounting nut that holds the main power wire on. Take the mounting nut off. There's a little washer. Well, it just fell, so I'm gonna have to fish it out once the alternator's out, but move the harness out of the way. Now let's use a 1/2" drive ratchet, release tension off of the serpentine belt. Find the serpentine belt tensioner. It's gonna be on the passenger side, and you're gonna wanna stick that ratchet in to the cutout, just like this. Make sure it's fully seated, otherwise it'll pop out when you try to pull on it. Then you'll actually want to push down or turn clockwise. There we go. And pull the belt right off of the alternator. Now let's use a 15mm socket, remove the bolts holding this bracket and the alternator down on the engine block. All the bolts are the same. Remove the bracket and lift the alternator up and out. Now let's unplug all the injectors. We're going to do this one side at a time. We have to pull the fuel rail off, but we are not disconnecting any fuel lines. We're just removing it and setting it to the side in the engine bay. The locking tabs for the fuel rail connectors are going to be on the front side, on the passenger side. So you're going to press with your thumb as you unlock these if you're using your left hand, but then on the driver's side they're going to be flipped around. Now there are two 8mm headed bolts holding this fuel rail onto the intake manifold. Let's remove both, and then we'll slowly pull this fuel rail up and out. These are very long bolts, but they are all the same. What I will do now is blow some compressed air down near each injector. I've already vacuumed everything here, so keep that in mind. But the compressed air will blow the rest of the debris out. And then I will spray some brake parts cleaner. What that's going to do is it's going to sneak down in there and lubricate the O-rings temporarily. These are rated for fuel, the O-rings, so they will withstand the very little bit of brake parts cleaner that I'm going to spray at them. That will allow this to slide out without potentially disconnecting any of the injectors, because sometimes, especially if you're starting to pry up on it, the injectors themselves can pop out of the rail and then a bunch of fuel spills out, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. Make sure you have a clear work area, push everything out of the way. Now you give this a good wiggle and start pulling. Perfect. This is flexible right here. Don't kink it, but it is flexible. So we're gonna have to swoop this over like this and then take care of the other side fuel rail. Moving over to the passenger side, same thing. Unplug all injectors and remove the rail. There we go. So we can take this, flip it, set it aside, bring the other rail close. Once again, try not to kink anything. And we can leave these right here as we do the rest of our work. At this point, you could get to the cam sensors. They're right here, one on each head, but it is very difficult still, so I'm going to continue with the intake removal. However, this is an optional stopping point for disassembly if you can get to them. Now let's start breaking free all of the intake bolts that hold this on. We're gonna start from the outer ones and work our way towards the center, which is the opposite of the tightening sequence. 8mm socket for all of these bolts. Break them free and then go around and remove them all. Once you've broken them free, it doesn't really matter what sequence you go in. I'm gonna start on this end and once again, cross pattern, 8mm socket, work your way towards the center. Now you should be able to pull up on the intake. It might be stuck on here from the gaskets. If it's really stuck, you can very gently try to pry it. There we go. Now you should be able to lift it straight up. Feels like there's still a wire attached on the back side. Yep, there's a wire down here. I have to pop that out. So now we should be able to continue lifting this right up and out. All right, there it is. Here's one of our cam sensors. The other one is just going to be in the same location but on the other side of the engine. The part is the same and the procedure for replacing it is the same, so I'm only going to show you how to do this one. Let's unplug the connector, and that requires pushing down on the center tab and pulling the connector away, which sometimes is easiest with the help of a pocket screwdriver, and other times even that doesn't do the trick just because debris likes to collect in here and locks that connector in. There we go. As soon as it clicks, remove it. This will allow us much better access to our 8mm headed bolt that locks in the cam sensor. Break this free and remove it. Just to make sure that no debris is going to get in the engine when I take this out, I'm going to take a wire brush and wire brush right on the top of this so that I can have a clean surface left behind around the sensor once I remove it. I don't want to have to do much, if any, cleaning at all with the sensor out of here. Now take a pair of pliers and very gently try to twist the sensor. Try to grab it as low as possible. Give it a few twists. There's an O-ring in there that needs to break free, and that's what's going to allow us to fully remove the sensor. I'm going to try to apply some pressure right on the base of the sensor and give it a couple twists. It's coming out slowly, but looks like there's quite a bit of corrosion stopping us from just pulling it straight out. There it is. All right, got it. Now you're going to want to clean off this surface, especially if you had that much corrosion, but you want to be very careful because you don't want to push it further in. Just try to very gently stick a rag in here and then twist it as you pull it out. It's time to install the new camshaft position sensor. I put a little bit of silicone paste or dielectric grease right on that O-ring and on that piece of plastic that's a little bit larger. And that is so I can help it slide in easier. You could use engine oil if that's what you have. And you want to make sure you press it all the way down by hand, just like so. You don't want to push it in or pull it in with the bolt, because that can actually pull it crooked and they can snap the mounting tab off or damage the rest of the sensor. Regardless, once you have it in, set the bolt back down into the mounting hole and thread it in all the way. Make sure this is bottomed out and snugged. and let's torque it to 89 inch-pounds. With that torqued, plug in the electrical connector, make sure it clicks. All right, that's locked in fully. Sensor is replaced. Do the same to the other side. If you're going to replace one, I recommend replacing both because you're all the way in here and you might as well. With the intake on the workbench, it's time to replace the gaskets. With a pocket screwdriver or a pick or anything that gets in here, there's a little slot that you can pry the old gaskets out of. Now I'm going to run my rag with a screwdriver guiding it throughout the entire area that the gaskets ride in. Just want to make sure that I get all this debris out of here and loosened up. And if you want to, if you think there's a lot of oil and debris in there, you can take some compressed air or brake parts cleaner and then compressed air and flush all these grooves out. Then have the new gaskets ready and slide them right over into their groove. Press them on, make sure they're fully seated, one at a time. Now flip the intake over. We'll do the same to the other 4 runners. Our intake gasket kit also comes with a gasket for the throttle body. Same thing, find the cutout, push the old gasket out, clean the groove if needed. And set the new gasket in place. Now we have to clean this surface where the intake sits. It is quite corroded and dirty for me, so I'm going to use a combination between a razor blade and a gasket scraper, as well as a vacuum cleaner to clean all of this up. And I'm going to plug all of the intake ports with some paper towels. That way debris doesn't get down there. And then at the end, I'm going to vacuum everything. That's why I mentioned the vacuum cleaner, as well inside the spark plug holes. I want everything clean, all debris out of the way, wipe it all down, and then finally install the intake back into position. It's time to bring the intake back in. As you do, make sure the gaskets stay in position and don't slide off. Make sure you don't pinch any wires or hoses. There we go. Before I actually start these in, I'm going to double check the gaskets. Just try to feel for them. Yep. And on the other side, do the same thing. All right, all of this looks good. So let's start in the bolts and make sure that they all start in by hand. You don't want to cross thread any of these by accident. All right, we are good on all of them. They are started in. So let's bottom them out. I'm going to do this very gently with a power tool. I'm not actually tightening them. Then we'll go around, torque them down, and then double check them all. And that's going to finalize the installation of the air intake. I'm going to follow somewhat of a pattern. Might not be the exact pattern that is required for torquing, but once again, I'm just bottoming these out. Starting from the center, working your way towards the outer ones in a cross pattern. Now it's time to torque these down. Here on the screen you can see the exact sequence needed. The torque for this is going to be 7.4 foot-pounds and an additional 45 degrees, which is an eighth of a turn. What this means is I'm going to do 2 passes at 7.4 and then 1 final pass adding 45 degrees. You want to make sure that the torque number is accurate before you add a rotational torque, so the degrees. Just as a tip, 7.4 foot-pounds converts to 89 inch-pounds, so that's what I'm going for. I'm just going to go around in a circle at this point, double check all of the bolts. Once again, 89 inch-pounds or 7.4 foot-pounds, then we'll add 45 degrees. Now I'm sure that all of mine are properly torqued, so in the same sequence, once again, let's add 45 degrees. That's an eighth of a turn. Just eyeball it if you don't have an angle meter or a digital torque wrench that reads degrees. I have one, so I'm going to use it, but once again, just an eighth of a turn at most is all they need at this point. That's all of them. At this point, you can't touch them anymore, or you alter the rotational torque that we just applied. So let's move along. Now with the intake secured again, it's time to bring the fuel rails back over and install them. Very careful with these. I'm going to do this one at a time. Now these lower O-rings, for me, they are quite dirty. I'm going to clean them up and inspect them. These should be replaced, but if they are still pliable, soft, and they still are holding their shape, then you can reuse them if you have to, and that's what I'm going to do. Once again, I'm going to clean them up with a rag, make sure that they are free of debris, and then we'll slide the fuel rails down. All right, I got this side cleaned up. I'll get that side a little bit closer. Okay, so these are sitting approximately where they need to be. They haven't dropped in yet. I'm going to clean up the other side and place it into its spot. Okay, so both rails are sitting in their mounting holes, or on top of where they're supposed to be mounted. I'm going to take some brake parts cleaner, spray them at each O-ring, just like when we remove these. This is going to help them seat a lot easier. Once they drop down and lock in, we can put the 2 bolts in and finalize the tightening of the fuel rails. Boom, done. That's how easy it should be. If you have carburetor cleaner, that's a little bit better because it's not as strong of a chemical, but it does the job too. And the biggest benefit is that those 2 evaporate, brake parts cleaner and carburetor cleaner. So I'm dropping down the bolts now, making sure that they start in by hand, which they seem to have done already. I'm just going to bottom them out. This will prevent the rail from moving around. Of course, these need to be tightened down and torqued, so let's do the other side and then we'll torque them all. So there is a sequence to these, and that is because they torque the intake down as well. They go through the intake and squish it all down, as well as, of course, hold the fuel rail on. So we're going to go 89 inch-pounds on these as well, or 7.4 foot-pounds, just like on the rest of the intake. But then we're going to add 90 degrees, that's a quarter turn, to all of these, starting from the rear on the passenger side, moving to the rear on the driver's side, then the front on the passenger side, then the front on the driver's side. That is the sequence, and that is the torque spec. So let's torque them all to 89 inch-pounds, and then double check them. Then we'll add 90 degrees, which once again is a quarter turn. All right, let's double check all of them. And now we can add our 90 degrees, once again, a quarter turn. Same sequence, starting from passenger rear, ending on the driver's front. All right, those are all torqued down. Just as a tip, if at any point during this tightening sequence it feels too tight, make sure that nothing is down in the threads of the holes that you're threading into. But also, if you're getting close and it feels too tight, just leave it right there. You're better off being a little bit under tightened than snapping one of these bolts. These are long, they stretch, they twist. They're designed to do that, but you don't want to break them off. Now let's lay the harness back down, plug the injectors in, add ignition coils and everything else really that goes on top of this intake. We're going to do this one side at a time, that way we just get everything completed before we move on. So I'm going to plug in the injectors now and then drop in ignition coils, plug those in, get everything situated. Make sure that anytime you plug in a connector, it clicks so you know that it's locked in. If you're tightening these ignition coils by hand, about 1/8 of a turn after they bottom out is plenty tight for them. All right, these are all plugged in. Now resecure any harnesses that you unclipped from the back, and let's plug in everything that goes on the side of the intake, starting with this passenger side PCV breather tube. Make sure that clips into place and locks in. Let's put this vacuum hose back on. Make sure it's pressed in all the way, and put the clamp back over. There we go. Put this solenoid valve back in, and the 2 bolts that hold it on. If you're doing this by hand, give them about 1/8 of a turn at most after they bottom out. And don't forget to plug this in. Make sure it clicks. Going across the top, we had this little vacuum hose that I unplugged from here. If you did the same, well, don't forget to plug it back in. There we go. Bring your throttle body in, line it up, and have a couple bolts ready to start it in. Once you get at least 2 started, it should stay. Now let's bottom these out, snug them, and torque them down. The torque for these 4 bolts is going to be 106 inch-pounds and an additional 60 degrees. And 60 degrees is between 1/8 and 1/4, so just do your best to kind of eyeball it if you don't have a digital torque wrench that reads degrees. We're going to go in a cross pattern so we can seat this properly. I'm going to double check them all now. Before I apply the degrees, it's important that these are torqued accurately. And now, 60 degrees. Don't forget to plug in the throttle body at the top. Make sure this connector clicks. There we go. Let's install this coupler that connects the throttle body onto the rest of the air intake. Slide it over and make sure it is fully seated. Use an 8mm socket to tighten up this clamp. Once it bottoms out, just give it a little bit extra. All you want is to snug this piece of rubber up. That way you can't move by itself, which it can't, so that's perfect. At this point, this is all installed. Let's put the alternator back before we move on so that we can have enough room to do that. Let's put the alternator back in its spot. Don't put the bolts in yet because this bracket has to go over. Once you line this up, then you can put the bolts in. All 3 bolts are the same, so just drop them in, make sure everything's lined up, start them onto their threads. Snug these bolts up. .35 foot-pounds, the torque for all 3 of these bolts. Get the wiring harness back. Resecure it anywhere that you removed it from. Plug in this electrical connector, make sure it clicks, and then peeling this main power wire back, you don't want to see any corrosion. If this is dirty and corroded, clean it up with some sandpaper. Mine's clean, so I'm going to take this mounting nut off, put the power wire on, put your lock washer on, and the mounting nut. Of course, make sure the wire goes through this slot, otherwise it's going to bend and break the plastic. Then take that 13mm socket, bottom this out, and once it bottoms out, which is right here, I'm going to give it an 1/8 of a turn at most. That's it. The lock washer will lock it on. You don't want to snap this stud inside the alternator if it twists, because it can happen. And then cover it up with this boot so that debris and moisture stay out of the way. Perfect. Let's get the belt back on, and you want to make sure it's sitting on all of the pulleys. I have it on the power steering pump down there. Looks like it just came off of this idler. Checking everything else, it looks like it's still perfectly centered, which is great. Obviously, I will still check it after, but push on your tensioner, release tension, slip it on, double check again. Make sure you really take a close look at it so that you can make sure it's not going to fall off once the engine starts, because that is a possibility. There we go. All right. And once you're sure that everything is seated, remove your tool. To install the rest of this intake piece, you'll see that the lip on this coupler doesn't go all the way around. What you want to do is start this box, basically this resonator box, up on top and then push it down. That's going to completely seat it over that coupler. There we go. And then push it back, making sure that it is indeed fully seated and lines up with the 2 bolt holes. So drop in the 2 10mm headed bolts. Snug them up. Let's reconnect the 2 hoses and, well, this line that went here. Snap this one on. And this hose here had a clamp. Found another one that I can replace it with. Slide this over. And tighten up that clamp. There we go. Let's get this intake snorkel back on. Line it up with the resonator, push it in all the way, and then on the airbox side, slide this over. There we go. Make sure it didn't fall off. And now just tighten these 2 clamps until they're snug. All you need them to do is squish a little bit on the rubber. Don't over tighten them, they're very easy to strip out. That got snug, give it a little extra. If you can't spin this, you're good to go. Nice and snug, perfect. Clip this hose back onto its retainers. Now let's reconnect our negative battery terminal. Make sure that this is loose enough to be able to go all the way down. Once you've driven it as far down as you want it to be, tighten it up with that 8mm wrench or socket. And I don't want to go until this stops, just enough to not be able to spin it, even though this isn't fully bottomed out or anything like that. You don't want to stretch out the terminal. Also, if there's any corrosion on these connections, you want to make sure you clean that off. Mine are clean.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.